Hey everyone, my name is Talha. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Remotebase.com. So today we have Catherine Hicks. She's the VP of Research Insights at Pluralsight Flow. And then she's also a founder at Catharsis Consulting. So welcome to the podcast, Catherine. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm great. I love getting to talk about research with like-minded folks and engineering leaders.
Oh, nice. Good to have you here, Catherine. So, could you introduce yourself a bit? Like, what do you do, at Pluralsight? What your responsibilities are in general?
Absolutely. I am a hard person to categorize. I'll share that right away. I like to call myself, I'm a social scientist by training. So I have a Ph.D. in Quantitative Experimental Psychology. So a lot of work with human behavior data and why it is that human beings do the things that they do. But I'm also a data scientist. I've done a lot of data work in tech. And I bring both of those things together at Pluralsight Flow. I direct a team called the Developer Success Lab. And this is a really unique team. We're actually a research lab team. So you can think of us as a team of real scientists out there studying software teams. And then we put this research out there into the industry. I love it. I love doing this work.
Oh, nice. So studying software engineers, like, how has that been like? It's probably I'm a software engineer. I've always been, and even I think that I'm a very hard person to work with. So how is it going for you overall?
I have to say, I love it so much. I'm really speaking from the heart here. I have always been really interested in how people solve problems, in the world. Like, how do we try to be innovative? How do we keep ourselves motivated? How do we kind of push the boundaries on what we can do together? And software engineers do that all the time. Every single day, there's some of the best problem solvers I've ever worked with. I think they have amazing experiences that we can learn from. Actually, as a psychologist, I often think, wow, like we should have been studying these teams more because they can teach us a lot
100%.
About human psychology too. Yeah. I also think psychology can really help these teams, can help us, build engineering organizations that people love to be inside of and that help people thrive.
100%. And, it's interesting. Like, I see that you've been a founder yourself. You're probably running Catharsis Consulting. So, problem solver, psychologist, interested in people. Like, how did you turn to be a founder as well? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. It was really a situation of make the job you want to see in the world, right? Like, I call myself an evidence scientist because I'm really interested in not just like, are we gathering, big data, but are we gathering the right data? Are we measuring things in a way that's really meaningful? And I just realized over the course of my early working life in tech, there wasn't, you don't go on LinkedIn and Google for like a social scientist, you're not going to find that job category. But I had this really deep like instinct that people needed these skills. And especially like a lot of organizations needed to be able to learn from research. And they didn't have the capacity, right? Like they didn't have a team of PhDs, they didn't know even what those skills were. So with Catharsis Consulting, which is like I call it an evidence science consultancy, we take on these research projects and we try to really get in there and do it and understand it from the point of view of the organization who's working with us. And a great example of this is I worked with a small healthcare company, and it was the kind of place that says, okay, we're not Google, we're like a tiny company. We're not going to run research, right? Like, how could we possibly do that? But they found me, they found like my website, and they said, well, this looks really like we're about to launch a new product and we're really worried about whether it's going to work. Our users are these complicated family groups. So they had this app that they were trying to build to help the adult children of aging parents. And so they had a technology problem, really, but they weren't a technology company, right? They didn't have UX designers. They were not sure what features to ask for, And so I led a research project. Yeah. And it was wonderful. Someone at this company, the person who, reached out to me, they had the insight that was like, we need to collect some evidence from our users, right? And we need it to really understand, the social science of like what will make this product work in the world. So that's a great example of the kind of project I'm able to take on with Catharsis.
Nice. And it's pretty interesting, like, working with those families. So did you actually speak with their customers or users?
I did. Absolutely.
So what was the process like?
So I do mixed methods research, right? So sometimes you hear about quantitative research, like maybe we measure a bunch of stuff from clicks on a website, or we measure a bunch of things from surveys, in quantitative numbers. But I also do qualitative research. And so that's what we call mixed methods, right? Both methods at once. So we did in-depth interviews. So I got people on the phone.
Nice.
I interviewed parents and their children, right? Which gives you this amazing perspective across generations. And from all of that, you're able to hear like, what are the themes? Something that I heard that came through really powerfully in this particular research project was people needed to feel respected. And so this became like a market insight for this company, right? Because they're designing a product for a group of people who, most of the products that get marketed to aging adults they feel like it's kind of patronizing. They feel like it doesn't see like them as whole people. So by bringing in these interviews, by sharing these stories, right, like directly to the executives at this business, we were able to really tell the stories of these people. And I think that that's kind of like the beautiful power of mixed methods research.
Oh, nice. I see that with Pluralsight, your main job is to work with or do research on software teams, what makes them successful and all. And then with Catharsis, you were working with parents and children and all sorts of people. So what was that transition like, working with one group during the day and then, working with another, at some other time. So what was that like?
Well, my main focus is definitely directing the Developer Success Lab now. The software engineers, they've got me. They've like really pulled me in. But Catharsis, we're able to take on like a small number of projects a year, and it's always like a huge diversity, like exactly what you said, because I think that it's a chance for me to learn from like using these methods and bringing them to really different organizations. And you see the same patterns, right, when you get to work across industries. So they actually really inform each other. Like a lot of the things that I learned consulting with many, many businesses, I've been able to bring to the Developer Success Lab. And we do research and we hear from developers who are on really small teams, or developers who are working in a bank, or developers who are working, at a hospital. And I think that you need a really diverse set of perspectives to actually
100%.
Understand software engineering, because there's so much out there that sort of treats it like, okay, understanding software engineering teams, like that's just, Apple or something, right? It's just like some big tech company. Yeah, but they're everywhere. I mean, every company almost has, some software engineering that impacts their business. Yeah, so
100%. And you've been working with software engineers for a very long time now, and probably you understand them more than anybody. So, what are some of the key insights? Like, what makes a software team or engineering team successful? Like, what are the traits in these teams?
This is the golden ticket question, right? Like, what makes it work?
Oh, wow.
Okay, so I have I have a research project on this. So we did a really big study with over 1,200 different developers. I think it was about a little over 13 different industries, right? Like that diversity, right? All career ranges. And I always have to give you like the scientist answer to every question is always like, hey, remember, it depends. It depends what some team will need. So but what we wanted to do in this research project was ask, are there things that really make it work? Like, what are the factors that really unlock the problem solving? And can those factors actually predict how productive these teams are? So we did find 4 key factors We call this the Developer Thriving Framework. It's available. You can read it totally for free. The whole
nice.
Yeah, you can look at the whole methods,
Nice.
everything. It's a huge value of our lab to share stuff openly, especially because the developers it's their voices, it's your data, right? We want to give it back to you. So these 4 factors that we found, we went out to measure them in developer teams because they were things that we have learned about in learning science and in social science and in clinical well-being research. So we have a clinical research scientist on the team too, someone who's a specialist in stress and anxiety.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
which I think is really, it's really important. Yeah. So I would describe developer thriving like these 4 big signals you can look for. One thing is agency. Do the developers feel like they can speak up when they disagree with something? Or if their team is measuring success, do they agree with that? Do they feel like they have a voice in how their work was measured? And that all is under something that we call agency, like basically feeling like you have an appropriate amount of power in your environment. And there's a second one is support and belonging. If you go out to a developer team and you say, do you feel like your colleagues and your manager, they accept you as a whole person? And we often think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as we should in this industry. We think about being accepted for your identity, but there's other parts of it too, right? So people feeling like, oh, I am an engineer, right? I belong in this community. I have my own role to play here. That's really a powerful signal that this team is working. And we have 2 other, I won't bore you by going super deep into them.
Oh,
but
no, that's pretty interesting. I'm already hooked by the phrase developer thriving. I'm going to ask more about it, but tell about the remaining 2. But, we have the agency, we have support and belonging. What are the other 2? Because you know what? You come from Pluralsight, and I think they put a lot of emphasis on, developer thriving and all. And that's the first time I'm hearing it out. We at Remotebase, we work with a lot of engineers, day and night, but I've never looked at them from this perspective. So would love to know the rest of the 2 as well. Like we have the agency, we have support and belonging.
Yes, I will send you, we have a white paper for you to read. I'll send it to you. It has illustrations. We have examples of things that developers thought helped this. So the other 2 are learning culture. Do developers feel like, and you've seen my previous work on this, do they feel like they're learning together as a team? And that's important, that it's a culture. It's not just individuals. And finally, we have something that we call motivation and self-efficacy. And so self-efficacy is this concept from educational psychology and social psychology. And we've measured it for many, many decades with people. And it is essentially this set of beliefs that you hold inside of yourself. Like when I face a problem, and I can't see the solution, like it's dark, I'm out there hitting the friction. Are you able to tell yourself things like, I know I can solve this. I've solved this in the past. I have the ability to solve it. If there's a new thing, that surprises me, I have the ability to adapt to it. All of that is basically this engine that we call self-efficacy. And so you want to be, as an engineering leader, you want that to be just like in the DNA of your organization. You want that culture of self-efficacy for your developers. Yeah. And then these
100%.
things, we measured them and we asked developers, how productive do you feel like you were over your last month of work? And these factors significantly predicted how productive they were.
100%, Kat. So we have agency, support and belonging, learning culture, and motivation and self-efficacy. So are they even measurable? Like, do you measure these in every team before measuring their performance and all?
Okay, and here's what's amazing.
How does that work?
Sometimes you hear about psychology things like this, and you might think, okay, I know this is really important, but you can't measure it. You know what I mean? It's like an intangible. But actually, as a social scientist, I'll give you our hot secret. You can measure these really well. And these are very complicated things. Like I said, I do mixed methods research because I never think that, a survey or every time we measure something, we are making a decision about how to like create a number that will be a tool for us. It's not perfect. It's never like the whole story. But there are these empirically validated scales. So basically sets of survey questions that psychology has used for years and years, and we test them over a large number of people. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to do a study that was over 1,000 different developers and over lots of industries. So we could say, does this work? We didn't want to put out something that was like, these are the important things, but only for like junior developers, right? Or these are the important things, but only for, managers or something like that. So when you're able to measure these things at scale, kind of across lots of teams, you start to see these really consistent patterns. Yeah. That's part of the evidence science, right? Bringing that to developer teams.
100%. So Catherine, the 4 pillars that you've talked about, like, do they all contribute to the, the thing developer thriving that we've been discussing, like, or is it a separate thing?
No, yes, that's exactly right. So basically these 4 factors are our way of trying to break down thriving and giving engineering leaders a place to start, right? Like pick one of these 4, see which one your team, some organizations do better on one than the other. But people need all of these different things. And so we use the word thriving because thriving to us kind of means it means better than okay, right? Like we can actually ask for our engineering teams to really love their work and to show up at work and feel like they are flourishing. Thriving is a concept in clinical psychology and in health research. And it basically means you are doing better than you even could have expected. So that's where we're trying to set the goalpost for engineering teams, right? Not just stopping with, satisfaction or other ways that we talk about it in developer culture, but actually saying like, let's talk about what would the best, most innovative, coolest environment be for our software teams.
Okay. Yeah, I always think that developers are complex beings. And then the concept of thriving and happiness in itself is very complex. So,
for sure.
For sure, I'm pretty sure that the concept of happiness and satisfaction is very, very complicated when it comes to an engineer, like, my associate. But what motivates you to keep looking or keep digging into that? Like, why did you even choose this topic? Like, this has to be the most difficult thing in psychology ever.
Well, you know what? The hardest questions are the most fun ones. I mean, but you know what? Here's something I like to say is it's easy to think maybe happiness is the goal, right? Like maybe happiness is the goal. As someone who studies teams, I don't think that happiness is my goal. I think that I want people to be happy because we've put them in a really good situation. But leaders can't just wave a magic wand and make everybody happy. Like that's never possible, right? And we can't like control other people's moods. And so what I try to do work on is what are the pieces of the environment around people that you actually have a lot of power over as a leader? And it's not happiness, right? It's not like wave a magic wand and make people happy. It's actually giving people these structural pieces that helps them do what they're really good at, right? Which is, again, software engineering is hard. It is complicated. And it's hard to plan for everything that people are going to encounter. There will always be friction. And so what we think of in developer thriving is not like magic wand, everybody's happy, but it's actually building a culture where people can feel like when they need the support, it's there. There's efficiency in that you're learning from other people. The quality of your problem solving goes up. And what we see when we study this kind of thing is that people do get happier. They feel a lot happier. In fact, one of the things that I think is the most important about this is all software engineering teams will encounter frictions, problems, things will not always work all the time. But when you look at a team and you see that they have these high scores on thriving, right? They actually feel okay in these moments of friction, right? They actually get through it faster. It doesn't demotivate everybody. It doesn't make everybody feel like their work is meaningless. So I think that these elements kind of protect people. So that's kind of my answer to that. I love to study the things that help protect people, and I think that social science has a lot to teach us about that.
100%. And, I just cannot process this. Like, if happiness is not the goal, like, what is? Like, for any team, like, to be
Philosophical.
very honest, no, I've been an engineer myself for the longest time, and every team I've worked with, we've always been tensed about the deadlines, about not measuring up to the expectations, and yada yada yada. So if happiness is not the goal, what is the goal as an engineer, or as a software engineer working in the team? Is it just working in an environment where I am accepted, or does it have to be something more than that?
I think human beings, as someone, now I'm speaking as someone I've been studying like people learning and achievement. I have like the Ph.D. in psychology, right? Like I've been fascinated by this for a long time. You could spend a whole career like, okay, like what should we be going after? I think one of the things that human beings really love to have in our lives is we like to be engaged. We like that flow state, right? And happiness
Yeah.
kind of goes up and down. Like as a psychologist, that people show up and they have moods, and those moods change on a day. You don't always want to say, sometimes hard things happen, and it's okay to not be happy, right? Like that's actually healthy, and you being present in the world. So I think that thriving is a little bit bigger than happiness, because it also might mean getting through hard things as a team together. But if you think back, right, like you've done this engineering work, has there been a time when you could think to yourself, this is a really good team? Like I just, there are things about this team that are really good. Have you had that experience as an engineer?
Whenever, to be very honest, we are solving hard problems, hard challenges, whenever we are able to deliver it, the very next thought that I have is that this is a good team. This is the only place I ever want to be. Like, this is the only place I would ever want to live in, to be very honest. But
see,
yeah,
that's
I mean,
it though. That's engagement. That's like, we came together, we solved a hard problem. I think human beings love to do that.
uh, but is it like, okay, let's just move forward from here. Like, what is the engineering culture in Pluralsight? Like, is it the same? Like, that's the only thing you guys chase, being able to solve problems and then feel like, that's the place I want to work with?
Well, let's break down like what a problem is though, because I think that Pluralsight is a learning company. We put out, one of our huge core values is about expanding access to, upskilling in the world, right?
Yeah,
And that's
100%.
and that's something that permeates the culture. Like I think that there's a version of that in engineering, right? Which is like, hey, we have powerful cultural stuff around doing mob programming together, right? Doing pair programming, like some of those practices. And I think sometimes you can really tell what the values of a place are by just asking, like, how do engineers spend their time? Do they spend time with
100%.
each other? Do they help each other? And so I don't know if there's a single label for that, but I see that so much at Pluralsight. But I also think there are values around accountability, like caring very deeply for our customers and our users, right? And that's something else that we've seen in our research is sometimes there's this stereotype, I think, about software engineers or developers, which is like, oh, they don't care. They're just like in the dark
100%.
writing code
100%.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
what we found is that developers care very, very deeply about what impact their code has, and feeling like you're doing engineering work that doesn't go anywhere, or feeling like, oh, I solved a really hard problem, but nobody cares about it. It's just, that's not enough for most engineering teams. Yeah.
Developers do care a lot, to be very honest. Like, now I'm talking to you, I feel like, I'm going through a therapy session, but we do care a lot about stuff, to be very
Yeah.
honest. And one of the things that is important to me is, if I'm being heard, like,
Yes.
if the team can rely on me, like if I'm one of those people who people come to for, if they can't solve a problem or they want me to look at a problem, I feel I pretty much feel like part of the team there and then, like, if I'm being involved in those problems. So
Yeah.
that pretty much makes sense. Yeah, it's like
That maps onto, I've heard that, especially from senior folks, right? Like folks who are, far enough along in their career that they can see all of these important implications of how we work and the decisions. We heard actually a piece of the Developer Thriving research project that I was telling you about. We sat down and we did some focus groups, which I think you'll find really interesting. We did these groups where we brought some engineering managers together, actually, and they had a conversation with each other, with themselves, right? Like, what are the things that are hard for us? And over again, they said, you can do everything right running your team, but if you're not translating engineering effort, to the rest of the org, you're not like making it visible, you're not helping your engineers see when they have impact. Like, that's a very important part of what engineers need. Yeah. And
100%.
It's hard. I think a lot of orgs are struggling with it. We heard a lot of stress, like it's too much for a lot of people.
100%. And Catherine, just a quick question, like, how important is the data in the whole process? Like, we've talked about, like, feelings and thriving and happiness and all. But if we talk about tangible things, like, for example, if you are going to monitor a team of engineers, like, how important is the data? What data points do you look for?
The data matters, right? The data really does matter. And I think it matters in some very complicated and human ways, actually. It's not just like one magic number, right? It's never that. But we have found some really important things. So one thing is, I'll just start with this example. Developers can be really hard on themselves. And
we are.
Right. And we talked to a lot of people, and we saw it in our survey research. We saw it. People said, if I actually track my own coding work and I have more data about it, I have some more numbers about it, I actually can see the progress that I make, and I give myself more credit. And that is huge for some people. And we see it also help teams. So I just finished looking at, we did a research study with 465 engineering managers. So that'll be out, on our website like next month or something like that. And one of the things that all those managers said, we gave them an example, and we said, hey, imagine this. And this is something psychologists like to do. Imagine that you have a new team, and you've been told, oh, this team of engineers, they're struggling. They're struggling to deliver. Like, what do you do in that situation? And a lot of managers said, I go to the team and I try to get some data, but it has to be good data, right? It has to be good like, data. Let's do a reflection of a process. And so some advice I would give is, we think engineering teams need to gather more data over time, like see how things change over time, not just kind of like grab it the moment you think of it. Be kind of sharing practices between teams. So something that we saw is, like, I think it was 87% of the developers in that huge project I told you about, 1,200 different developers, right? 87% of them said, tracking parts of my coding process helps me understand like what I'm working on, and helps me understand what my teammates are working on. It helps me make trade-off decisions. Like, I see the value in that data. But at the same time, we also found that most people said, my team's making mistakes with how they're collecting data, or I don't even know if my leaders use data at all to think about this engineering organization. So I think that's a really
Amazing.
big problem for the field. Yeah.
100%. But as a lot of people who would watch or listen to the podcast are engineering managers and engineers themselves. Like, could you tell us about some of the tools that we can use to track the data? Because
for sure,
because data is something even that's pretty vague for me. Like, what should I be on the lookout for? What should I collect? Like, even for my own team.
Of course. So first of all, I work for Pluralsight Flow. Like, we are a data company for developer teams. So,
nice.
I'm very honest about this. I'm never a salesperson for anything. I'm a researcher. But I believe in the values of this company. I really believe in our mission. So for instance, one of the things that we've seen in our research is if you bring in some metrics like, we proposed this number of tickets and how many did we close, right? Or DORA metrics. I don't know if you've ever heard of the DORA metrics.
I have not.
So that's a great one. So this is not from us, but you can look it up. This comes from a DevOps research. I think it's DevOps Research and Assessment is what it stands for. They're now at Google. And they have this long-running research program that looks at what is a good way for engineering organizations to measure their success. So they look at things like deployment frequency, and there's a number of metrics like that. There's no single one thing, but I'll give you a few big patterns, right? I never like to say, here's the metric to use, here's the data to use. Like, use the data for your team, right? We have seen that most of the developer teams we see in our research, they want more data about their process, like less about outcomes, more about process. So you could even take the parts of developer thriving and say, what are metrics we could have around, for instance, like learning culture? Like, do we have a velocity of code reviews, Or do we have diversity in who's code reviewing? Or is it like one person is just reviewing everything for like one part of the code base, right? And man, if that person's out sick, then we all get blocked, I think that as leaders, we need to think about data as this way of telling a story, about and sort of surfacing that story to the rest of the organization. We also see a lot of benefit in one-on-one metrics that developers bring to their one-on-ones. So for instance, giving your manager kind of like the ammunition or the tools to show the value of what you've done. And maybe that's not, we all know that something like lines of code is a really, crude and sometimes terrible measure. It's not a good way to measure. So you want to stay away 100%. From those you want to stay away from that like raw quantity stuff and think about metrics that might help you talk about your performance, and sometimes those aren't always like, this number went up, right? It went up and up and up and bigger. That's the goal. Sometimes it's actually like, well, we want to make sure everybody does, a certain number of code reviews every month. And we're going to just track that. And we're going to see how we're doing on it. And then the magical thing about that is people learn that it's really important when you put data to it, right? So I think, again, the agency piece matters. Like, bring your developers in, ask them, what do you think we could use this data, right?
100%. And you mentioned code reviews, and I've been an engineer for a very long time myself. So code reviews is always a very sensitive topic. So if I have one of my colleagues is reviewing my code, and things happen, like sometimes even fights happen. So what are your thoughts there? Like, what is a good way to give reviews or give feedback to your colleague or somebody you work with, and also
this is so important. I think that, so there's a trick that I think about when you talk about giving feedback. Okay, I'm gonna give you another like psychology trick. Think about are we talking about what we call like surface feedback or deep feedback? So sometimes, right, imagine you have like an essay or something. If you're like, I'm going to fix the commas and I'm going to change the font size and I'm going to put it in a different color, that's surface feedback. And sometimes it's about depth feedback, like, okay, I think you need a different piece of evidence, or I think you need a different thing to flow. So I did an experiment one time where we told people, you are looking at a piece of work. It was students and they were reviewing a website design, right? So they were like reviewing each other's like website design. And for some of them, we told them, you are looking at something that's in draft. This is like this is a first draft. And for others, we just told them this is a project, just review the project, right? And what we found was that if you tell people this is in draft, this is like you're the first person to look at this, their feedback got way better. Like the quality of feedback that they gave was way deeper, way better. So I would say on code reviews, there's so many pieces of it that we could talk about. But the most central heart of it is like, this is a moment to give, depending on where you are, depending on what kind of code review is, you should approach it like you are collaborating with somebody.
100%,
like you're working together and the code is this third thing that you're working on. It's not about who that person is. It's not about, whether you agree or disagree about exactly. It's about you guys, or folks coming together and solving it together. And that attitude will make you make the right choice a lot of the time. Yeah.
100%. And, on that topic, so by the way, throughout my career, I've always worked remotely, even way before pandemic. I've always worked remotely with, when I was in Pakistan, I used to work with teams in the US and all. So it becomes harder when you're working remotely, if you get a review from somebody you haven't even met. So chances are that, you take it to the heart, or, you won't like it. So what should be the attitude there? Like, every other person right now in the current world is working remotely. So what are some of the ways to give feedback in a remote environment?
Yeah. I love that. First of all, I love that you're asking it about the person giving the feedback, because I think sometimes we spend a lot of time saying, have a tough skin and, don't have imposter syndrome. Like we spend a lot of time on that person who's receiving the feedback. And I'm always like, hey, you got feedback that felt unfair. It's very reasonable to feel bad about it. Like it's not a good experience. So
100%.
it is, it should be on the person giving the feedback. And we need that culture in our organizations of care, So here's some stuff I would say about remote stuff. And I, again, love that you said this too. Many of us worked remote way before the pandemic, right? And engineering has kind of always been distributed across the world and distributed. And you're collaborating
100%.
with code that people wrote and, in some other part of the world. Even if you're just working by yourself, you're probably using like a tool that was built by someone far away, right?
100%.
So here's what I would say. One really important thing about remote environments is think about it as it's low context. And so the thing about low context is that very small signals can become the only signal someone gets, right? And that matters a lot because people are always trying to get those signals. They're trying to say, what does an engineer sound like at this company? What do people respect? What do people care about? It's just built into our psychology that we are always scanning the environment around us. We're always looking for those signals. And I think sometimes with remote stuff, we really spend a lot of time on the wrong signals. So like, we do a lot of status updates. We're like, oh gosh, we're remote. So we got to do like a fire hydrant of information because we're so scared about like people not getting the information. And I understand where that fear comes from. But I think one of the biggest signals that people actually need is the social support stuff, right? And so doing like smaller reviews, more frequent, like there's lots of stuff you can do to avoid this problem. But one of the things you want to avoid is you want to make sure it's not this situation where someone gets like a tiny signal that you didn't even mean to send. Like maybe like an offhand comment, in a code review, and they take it back, and they say, oh my gosh, this is how we write code here, I guess, and they've misunderstood it. And then they don't hear from you for like 3 months. And then they've written all this code in a way that really wasn't what you were thinking at all. But because they only had this tiny little piece of feedback to go on, they really overcorrected. So that's
100%.
that's like a kind of cycle that you'll see on a team that's starting to get like alienated. Like they're not talking to each other. They're not collaborating. So think about building in, make the signals smaller so that if one of them goes wrong, it's not such a big cost. Make them more frequent, and also make the social stuff really important. Like make it explicit. Like, I'm thinking you should do it this way because, of this, and this. And when I read code review comments, and I think this is a really good one, right? From someone who's really like building up the team. I see them do stuff, right? I see probably people like you do stuff like they say, hey, I see where you're going with this. You're trying to do it this way. And we should probably do that, but we're going to do that later, 2 months from now. And right now we're going to do this. So you actually see like all of this really important planning in software that's happening in code reviews, especially like to junior engineers, and maybe they don't know, they don't see everything you see. And those conversations are gold. Like that's it,
100%, yeah. And I agree to that. And Catherine, thanks a lot for answering all these questions. It was lovely having you. So I saved the hardest question for the end, by the way. So yeah, and this is something even I would love to know about, like your thoughts on these. So what's the overall effect of diversity on the engineering teams, remote, non-remote, and all? So what are your thoughts here? Because this is something we don't discuss a lot. Like, when it comes to engineering, all we are focused on the engineering part itself. But what is the impact of diversity on the teams?
Yeah, very important question. And I assume when you say diversity, you mean like people with different backgrounds, with different identities,
anywhere in the world,
everything. Yeah. Okay.
Any kind of people, people like just people.
Here's what I have to say about it. I think that sometimes, especially nowadays, we say like, okay, diversity, great, we should have diversity. It's a nice thing to have, I get, but it's not the same as engineering problems. It is the same. It's absolutely the same. It's all tied together. So you see that diverse teams are teams where people understand how to support each other, diverse teams that are functioning, that take care of their people, all of that. These things go directly into the quality of the code that we write. They really do. Like it goes into how you think about putting products in the world. We've seen this in research on even like what businesses make more money. You can even go right to that outcome, and diverse teams are more profitable. They make more strategic decisions. And I think inside of engineering context, to tie it really closely to code and problems in code, all of these elements, like if we can be accepting people and people who are able to be open-minded, to listen to each other, to understand that some people might have different communication styles, to have all of that openness at the core of our values, that actually also directly goes into writing better code. You give better 100%. Code reviews. Yeah. You're like having these processes that work for more people. And my perspective is, wow, this is not optional. It's, first of all, it's what I want to do ethically. But also it's like, if you want to really build the technology of the future, this is a non-negotiable. This is really, really necessary for your engineering org.
100%. True that, all of that, to be honest, I couldn't agree more. Catherine, thanks a lot for joining us. It was a great conversation.
Been a pleasure.
For our audience, you were tuned into Masters of Tech. Thank you.